Hello, everyone at District 101 and other viewers alike. For today, we have our keynote speaker for our upcoming District 101 conference on May 7th and 8th with us today, Sean Conroy. Hello, Sean.
Hey,
Really happy to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So from your bio, if people have read it, people can tell you're many things. You're a writer, you're a comedian, you do improv. Can you share a little bit about where you are now and what you're doing?
Sure. I live in a little area called Hollywood, California. Maybe you've heard of it. And I do all those things. I do stand-up, I do improv, or I should say I did up until about 2 years ago. There was a big thing that went on. I don't know if you heard about it, but the whole world shut down. And so I do a lot of live performing. And I also have, for the last almost 2 decades, made my living as a writer here in Hollywood, a television writer. So I've worked on a bunch of different television projects and sort of tried to work my way up the chain in that area, so that eventually what I'd like to do is be in a position where it's not other people telling me what to do, it's me telling other people what to do.
That'd be really cool. Do you know what your dream job would be if you could just snap your fingers and put yourself in that position now?
Yes, shooting guard in the NBA. But if that doesn't work out, I would like to be somebody who has his own TV show, who runs his own TV show, the boss. Showrunner in television is the ultimate job for everybody. So that's what I aspire to.
And for all the people who are not as savvy in Hollywood, what does a showrunner do? So you run your own show, but also kind of what does that entail?
You are the head writer, the executive producer, the casting director, the budget. You're just involved in every aspect of production of the TV show. And so every decision has to go through you. It's like being the chairman of a corporation, ultimately, but more hands-on, I think, more involved in the day-to-day operations. But the fun of it, really, to me, out of everything, is getting to write the show. And so being a showrunner means that you came up with the idea for the show and you're trying to execute the idea for the show. So that's kind of what I'm going for.
So you talked about how you did improv up until 2 years ago because of some big event that happened in the world.
Yes.
I know that you had toured actually for the improv show. Can you share a little bit about how you got to there?
Sure. This was a while ago, but back in the early 90s, there was an off-Broadway show in New York called Chicago City Limits, which was an improv show and I should say it wasn't just improv, it was also a musical review. Where we did a lot of sort of song parodies about current events and stuff. That was the big finale of the first act, but most of it was improvised. And I just saw a posting about an audition for their national touring company, and I auditioned for them. They didn't care for my audition, but I had a friend who also auditioned, and they wanted to come see her perform live. So they did. And because the show that we did live was my show, I got to sort of shine, and they asked both of us to join the group. And so for about 4 years, I traveled the country doing improv shows.
Wow. It's great to have friends who are also in the same industry. So then
it sure is. It really makes a difference. Yeah.
And I remember that you said you had toured in 32 different states. That's a lot of shows. Do you have a memorable experience or something that you'll always remember about a particular show?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really fun experience. So there were lots of shows that were crazy or fun or bizarre or interesting. Everything from, going all the way to Baton Rouge, Louisiana to do a show, and knowing, showing up there and realizing that basically we were doing a show from New York to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the show was for like 30 people in the tiny banquet room of a restaurant where there was also an open buffet, like bizarre, but then also doing shows in front of, 5,000 people at Purdue University. And by the way, I should say that when I went to Baton Rouge, I realized that it's only, there's this Me and Bobby McGee song that's like, we hitchhiked all the way from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. It's like a 45-minute drive. It's not a big deal. But we did a show once. This is probably the one that stands out the most to me. We did a show once in Arkansas, and we asked for a suggestion from the audience. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you know Razorbacks sports, the Arkansas college team, but they have a chant that they do called the Woo Pig Suey chant. And so there we were in front of 1,000 people, and we said, can we have something somebody might say to another person? And the entire audience burst into this chant that lasts for like 30 seconds. And I had never seen it before. And I just remember being like, what is going on right now? And sort of wandering out on stage and staring at them. So stuff like that would happen. And it was just really fun,
What did you do? Do you remember the chant now? And do you remember what you did with?
I remember the chant. I couldn't tell you what we did with it, but the chant is basically the whole crowd goes, woo pig. They all throw their hands up and they go, woo pig suey, woo pig suey, woo pig suey, Razorbacks. But it takes, like I said, 30 or 45 seconds. So it's this gigantic crowd going crazy all at the same time together. And it's sort of fascinating,
Well, at least since it was 30 seconds, you had 30 seconds to come up and scramble through your role.
Yeah, right. Try to figure out what to do next. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a pretty funny story, though. That I'm sure you had many moments that were so obscure in your other shows as well.
And part of the fun of it was also the fun and the also nightmarish aspect of it was being on the road with 7 other people. I mean, we all know what traveling is like when you're with your loved ones. Imagine what traveling every day with your work colleagues would be like when you're all packed into a van. And back then, there's no Google Maps. So instead of just enjoying yourself playing car games, you're just arguing all the time about whether you're lost or not, So there was lots of stuff like that too.
Mm-hmm. No, I haven't done a road trip before, but I have definitely seen, all the movies about road trips. I've seen all the comedy movies about road trips that I can imagine more or less what would be like, especially with your coworkers.
Right.
Absolutely. So we also talked about previously how you were a math and science teacher at one point while also doing improv. Mm-hmm. At what point did you decide that I am going to forego or stop the math and science teaching and fully commit to comedy? Because that's a big decision and it's not easy to make.
Right. It was 6 years into my career as a junior high school teacher. And like you said, initially I taught math and then I taught science for years after that. And I loved it. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I loved the kids. It was challenging and fun. And one of the things that I really loved about teaching junior high school, and I'm sure anybody who's a teacher can relate to this, is there's just never a dull moment. You're just dealing with stuff all day, every day, from the moment you wake up till the moment you go to bed. Mm-hmm. But I had been towards the end of that time, I had been doing comedy professionally for a couple of years. And I just knew that was the thing I really wanted to do. And I think comedy is hard enough to make it as a career that if you're doing something else at the same time, it's just not going to happen. And you have to commit to it 100%. So I was, I think about 10 credits short of my master's degree when I quit graduate school and quit teaching. So you can imagine how thrilled my parents were when that happened, because they knew how sturdy a career comedy was, which was not at all. And they much preferred me to continue, working as a teacher and having health insurance and having a pension and all those things. But I loved performing and writing so much that was what I decided to do.
And those are great reasons. Personally, I'm an engineer right now, as many people in District 101 are, because of being in the Bay Area.
Right.
And I plan on later on this year to actually go pursue an MBA instead of continuing with. I do enjoy tech and the tech world, but as a role as an engineer, not so much. So definitely, not quite as much as a huge transition from teaching to comedy, but I definitely get
but a different thing nonetheless.
Yeah. Obviously, with all your experience as in improv and comedy, what are your tips that you can give to people on how to know something is funny and what works and what doesn't work? Basically tips for trying people like me who try to be funny and are not great at it.
I think knowing if something is funny is really easy. Are people laughing or not? But the difficulty is if you're writing stuff, you have to write it beforehand and hope for the best. And I think for me, first of all, I always thought I was the funniest person I knew. That was something that I never doubted. I'm not saying anybody agreed with me. I'm saying that was in my head where I was. But you just have to make sure that if you're trying to be funny, it's working with the people around you. And I, have spent years and years and years honing that muscle of judgment of what's going to work for people and what's not. And I think that I'm at a point now, which I don't think I always was at, where even if nobody's around, I can write something down and go, okay, I think this has about a 75 or 80% chance of working if I do it in front of people. But until you do it in front of people, I think you're never going to know. Mm-hmm. So the other part of that is, if you're writing something for a presentation or to do in front of people later on, I think it helps to test it out in front of people before you do it in front of the final audience,
Yeah, there's lots of trial and error. Something might be funny to you,
right,
in that moment, in that specific context, but
that's exactly right. Everybody, comedy is like food. I think everybody likes different things, but there are certain things that most people are going to be on board with. And I'm not saying you always have to go with what everybody's going to be on board with. Sometimes it's fun to be the person who says the thing that maybe people have to think a little bit more about, or that's a little bit weirder or a little bit outside the box. And that's okay too. But you want to have a pretty high hit average. You want to get to a lot of stuff that everybody's going to be on board with.
Do you have a particular type of humor you enjoy using when you write or when you do your stand-up comedy?
I love knock jokes. No, I think that if I had to pin down exactly what I love doing and what I love watching, I love it when things are kind of, I don't know how to say it, intellectual, cerebral, smart, maybe is an easier word to describe that. So when they're smart, but also I love silly, like that is one of my favorite things too, is just when, and if you can combine those things, that's what I love the most,
Like jokes where you might not get the initial reaction, but after a beat where people think about it, and they're like, oh, and then they start laughing because it all comes together and makes sense.
Yeah. Or yeah, I guess I would love to get the laugh right on the joke, but sure. If people have to, you don't want to be the person who's like, that's a thinker, folks, you'll get it on the way home. But, but and like I said, the other part of it that I love is just silliness, that nobody takes themselves too seriously.
I think in comedy and just in life, there's, if you take things too seriously, it's hard to just enjoy the moment and enjoy what's going on. So
that's exactly right.
In comedy and in life, both are applicable.
You're getting a little deep here, Jackie, but that's good.
Yeah, comedy applies to life too, I think. So for very new Toastmasters or people who are just working on, not just being funny, but just thinking on your feet, do you have any tips for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because I have been an improviser for so long, one thing that I think applies to improv and probably applies to this kind of stuff as well is we always talk about being in the moment, like rather than anticipating what's going to work and thinking about what's going to come later and how this is going to all work out, just being present and reacting to what's going on in the moment. Obviously, if you're doing a presentation or a speech of some sort, which is, what it seemed, or I don't know, maybe Toastmasters, you also do toasts, but you're going to have something prepared, which is great. But then you also have to be aware of everything that's going on around you all the time and reacting to that as well, instead of, because I think sometimes things aren't going to go exactly the way you planned, and you can't pretend that they are going the way you planned,
Yeah, definitely you face a lot of that in improv, and I'm sure with even just in Toastmaster, even like regardless of how well you prepare, you can have people coughing, right. You can have someone accidentally open a door or slam their glass on the counter because by accident, and you can ignore these things and just pretend it didn't happen, but you can also incorporate them and pause a little bit if you get interrupted, whatever you need.
Right. Not to go too deep again, but life is not a controlled experiment. There's lots of other things that are going to intrude every time you do something.
Absolutely. For you, obviously, humor and improv is very near and dear to your heart. What about improv and comedy and humor makes it so meaningful for you?
Mm-hmm. I think at a base level, from the time I was a kid, I sort of, and I don't even know if I was aware of this at the time, when you say something and other people laugh, it means they approve of you. It is a way to connect with other people and have them not necessarily like you, but at least not think you should immediately leave, So I think that's one thing. Another thing that appeals to me about it is about doing comedy is it's a way to maybe share some of my life experiences that are relatable to people, that makes people comfortable with those things that sometimes aren't the greatest experiences. And then another, I would say another thing is when you're performing comedy live in front of an audience, I think there's a sense of connection among that audience. Like it's, everybody sharing an experience. There's something that makes you feel good about that. I don't know if I'm articulating those things right, but that's kind of what I love about it.
The affirmation of people enjoying your presence. It's like your presence and what you're saying, it makes people happier and
yes, absolutely, makes people happier, enjoying your presence but also enjoying each other's presence. Like there's a very different experience between sitting at home and watching a stand-up special on TV and going to a club and watching people perform. You're in a sense connecting with all the people sitting around you, not just the person on stage. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to.
Absolutely. I think for a lot of the Toastmasters out there, it's relatable when we try to make something humorous or we try to make something inspirational and people you can feel people nodding or see people nodding or hear people laughing. It's the same feeling, but for you, it's a bigger scale instead of our meetings of 8 to 20. You have,
I mean, I've done many shows with audiences that size, so yeah, no matter how many people there are, what you're trying to do is all connect and share your life experiences.
Do you have for the tougher crowds, do you have tips on how to handle the crowds that just don't seem to be having that connection with?
Yeah. I'm trying not to be glib about that, but yeah, I mean, that's just going to happen sometimes. I mean, that's what I'm saying about being in the moment is I think my reaction, I'll speak for myself and not for anybody else, is if the audience isn't getting on board, I tend to spiral into self-doubt and self-deprecation, and this is all my fault, and I'm terrible at this, and I'm not only terrible at this, I'm terrible at everything, and I'm a terrible person. Like, I think it's very easy for your brain to go to extreme lengths. And I think if you just stay in the moment and go, well, this isn't going well, that's immediately going to shake people out of their complacency and maybe make them relate to that rather than to the experiences you're sharing. I think you have to, look people in the eye and sort of not be confrontational, but at least be forthcoming about the fact that you're aware that things aren't going well. I can remember once doing a show in a stand-up club in New York City, and they used to do these shows where it would be like the show would start at midnight and they would have 3 comics on the show, and every comic would do 20 minutes. And this is such a long, complicated story, but whoever was in charge of the club put me up last on this show. So there were 2 comics before me, and the 2 comics before me were a particular style of comic that involved sort of very sexual stuff and very obscene stuff. And meanwhile, my act was sort of like, hey, don't I look like an older, less magical Harry Potter? Like, who here loves time travel? That kind of stuff. And so once you lower the bar to, we're just going to say the F word every 5 minutes, it's very hard to get people back to, time travel and Harry Potter. So I went up to do my 20 minutes and the room was packed. There were 200 people there, and they thought they were going to see another version of what they had already seen. So it was very hard to get them on board. So they were just silent the whole time I was up there. I was up there for, so by the end of it, I said, well, I'm going to do one more thing and then I'm going to get out of here. And I just heard somebody under their breath from way in the back of the room just went, thank God. And I just said, you know what? I feel exactly the same way, sir. I am 100% with you. I cannot wait. And that got a huge laugh and kind of saved the entire set for me. I mean, it still was probably the worst set I've ever had, but I knew that I could walk off stage feeling okay because at least I had connected with people in that particular moment. By being present and by being aware of what people were feeling. And instead of feeling like this is totally my fault, going, I identify with what's going on with you right now.
Yeah, that's, I know in my couple of high school acting classes I took, like you really you really responded to the audience and, took what they had kind of as a gift and elevated or at least turned around your set. Right. Because you are the keynote speaker for the conference, would you be able to give a little teaser trailer or kind of introduction or share a little bit about what you might talk about so that people have a better sense?
Sure. Yeah. The speech is called I can't remember what it was, but if at first you fail, succeed. And basically my intention is to get to some ideas of how to be prepared for when things go wrong and not just try to get out of it, but to embrace it and to find a way to use it to your advantage. And is there a way that, you mentioned before, somebody might drop a tray of drinks, or their phone might ring, or they might cough. Is there a way to not just ignore that and keep going, but is there a way to turn that into an opportunity? Is there a way to alchemize the lead into gold, so to speak? So that's what I'm gonna try to talk about.
That's awesome.
I hope it goes well, and if it doesn't, I will try to turn that into an opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be different, especially since it's all virtual. So
Yes.
How is that going to be different in terms of?
Well, it's very hard to be present in the room with the audience when you're not present in the room with the audience. It just changes the equation quite a bit, because you're not getting laughs necessarily. You're not getting nods necessarily. You're not even seeing the people that are listening necessarily. So it's a little bit, or a lot, trickier than doing something live. So we'll see. I mean, I've done some of it over the course of the last couple of years, but it's definitely something I'm still getting used to.
Yeah. Regardless, though, I'm sure it will be educational for all the Toastmasters out there, given that comedy is not an easy thing. It's a very difficult skill to do well. And
I think so. It's an art form, right? Don't they call comedy an art form, which means it's not just a thing that everybody can do? I call it an art form. Maybe nobody else calls it that, but I call it that because I have high expectations for it and high regard for it.
I think it's an art form. It's not just, it's also a very personal thing, right? There's a lot of different types of humor. You can have like a far out of left field kind of things are unexpected, or like you said, the more cerebral type of smart humor, a lot of different types of humor. And it's just like food and just like art. It's each, as I said, has their own
personal taste.
Yes. All right. And as we conclude, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers out there?
Sure. If they would like to know more about me, feel free to go to my website, which is seanconroy.com, SeanConroy.com. There's lots of information there about stuff I have done in the past and stuff I'm doing now. They can also follow me on all the social medias at Sean Conroy. So,
all right. Thank you. And with that, just a reminder to everyone that the conference is on May 7th and 8th. And don't forget to register for the conference. Thank you so much, Sean, for joining us today.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm really looking forward to this. This is going to be fun.
Looking forward to it too. Really looking forward to seeing you on both days, as a keynote speaker and then the workshop the next day.
Right. You won't be able to stop me.